But yeah, so the goal with this is just ask questions. My goal is obviously from your background, your degree in psychology, but also your experience as a headhunter, right? Would you use that term?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So is the what you see and what your candidates see when it comes to the application process and what they deal with from companies, I guess really just through the negotiations, through the onboarding and things like that. So I've got a couple of questions, and then if you've got some things that you want to share, like like from your perspective,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's the goal with this.
Okay.
I want to essentially educate the companies out there that are trying to hire,
Yes.
that want to hire, putting things in the applicant's perspective, because I think a lot of times we get caught up in the echo chambers in the boardrooms in our own meetings of what we think is best, and we never actually get feedback from the applicants.
Right.
And they're not going to tell you.
And most of the people that have been in the positions that are making the decisions on applicants in the interview process haven't actually interviewed in several years.
Yeah. So they're rusty. They haven't gone through those experiences, and they just don't know what it's like. What positions do you mostly recruit for?
Typically, I deal with either specialty positions, engineers, IT, healthcare, like physicians, different specialties for that, as well as project management. Currently, I was doing a business development specialist role. But yeah, generally, I like to keep it fairly broad because I like the challenge. I like the diversity and keeping... learning. I like learning something new about the different positions I fill instead of getting stuck in one bracket.
Yeah. And I know this, but other people may not. What industries do you focus on?
I would say specialty work. I really enjoy working with architectural firms, engineers. They are unique characters, so learning how to talk and interact with them has always been a plus for me. And more of the executive side of things. I have a pretty good grasp on business development and operations and how things from a leadership perspective should run. And so that gives me a unique edge when it comes to finding the right person for the right company.
Gotcha. Okay. And so architectural firms, other specialties, engineering is in almost everything, right? So,
right. So like
manufacturing,
mechanical, construction backgrounds, let's see, electrical engineering. I've done those. Larger projects are fun. Federal and governmental contracts are really kind of my forte. I've got a lot of military background, and personally, I did tactical distribution for a couple years, so I know how contracts, proposals, GSA, all that fun stuff works.
Yeah.
So I have enough knowledge, probably just enough to get in trouble, but kind of utilizing that has been interesting and fun.
Okay. And is that typically, is that local? Can it be remote?
Both. So I have worked with a company that handles emergency preparedness. So they work with FEMA and different contracts to prepare private sectors and military personnel for how to respond in emergency situations. And they're national. So I've placed several national people for them that are remote. And then like my current client is more on the technical side of things. It's an architectural firm, and they're local to Virginia Beach. So I like to have the people I can meet in person locally because it's just a little more interesting, a little more interactive.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. I do nationwide. I have a client in North Carolina currently.
Gotcha. Is that the hospital?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So it's a spine and pain practice out in North Carolina. They have several locations, and I'm hiring for them some physicians and PAs right now.
Okay, cool. And so help walk me through, I guess, from your perspective, kind of like the psychological side of when you're looking for placements, right? What is that experience like when it comes to how these companies are, or how you're helping them put together like those candidate profiles, like the ideal candidate profile, if that's if you use that term?
Absolutely.
What's the psychology behind that? Like, because some people can say, well, it's just demographics, or it's just what we've had in the past, but it goes much deeper than that.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of the times when you're creating, or from my perspective and position, you have to sell the company to these candidates. It's not just, are you a good fit for this company? It's, is this company a good fit for you?
Yeah.
So a lot of companies don't look at the big picture of hiring people. They just look at, we need a checklist of skill sets. And you have to know that you're presenting yourself. What are your morals? What is your mission statement? What is it you're offering someone? Not just benefits, but what kind of life are you offering them? Is there any work-life balance? You have to take the specific things that are current that people are looking for. You know, a few years ago, it was all financially based. Who's offering the most money? Who's, giving bonuses and big fat checks? And now people are, post-COVID are like, I want a work-life balance. I want to be remote. I want to have that flexibility. I want to, have that atmosphere. So from a company's perspective, if you look at it as what do I like about my company that I want to share with somebody else?
Yeah.
Then you get a better outlook of candidates that value the company rather than just come in and do a job.
So from your experience, if you've dealt with companies that were hesitant to share that, or they just for whatever reason, couldn't come up with things to share like you're talking about, what are the underlying reasons behind that? I know you probably don't get into the weeds of fixing it, but how do you observe that?
Fortunately, you don't come across that too often. But if someone struggles with finding their reason or their why for their company, because I primarily meet with either the owners or the VP or operations directors.
Yeah.
So if they don't know why they're personally working for the company, I don't want to hire for that company.
Yeah.
Because if they can't tell me, then obviously there's a problem within the company. So you really want to help them and navigate them in a way that is like open-ended questions or suggestions almost. A lot of the times they need a little push in the right direction. So, but, getting them to understand the deeper aspect of their job is, in their specific position, actually assist me in finding the perfect candidate for them.
Gotcha. And from your experience, we didn't talk about this. How long are most of these companies you're working with? How long have they been around?
Oh, years. I've worked with several well-established companies. The longest dating back to just celebrated 20 years in the business. And then the shortest term would be under a year. I've worked with smaller companies that are just kind of up and growing and, figuring out the operation side of things and helping with that HR perspective to a limit. But any kind of company size or term length is definitely, there's challenges to both.
Yeah. Okay. And so like from your perspective, kind of walk me through what does this candidate experience having your help? What are they experiencing compared to, a job seeker that's not using a headhunter to find a job? What's the difference?
Great question. Most companies place a job ad and then someone applies and you shift through thousands of resumes. You typically have someone in HR that doesn't really understand what they're looking for, or they're following a checklist to check things off. So it's very conveyor belt, if that's the best way to put that. For me, I obviously shift through thousands of resumes, but I'm actually actively hunting people out that have the qualifications and specifications. So from a company's perspective, you're getting a lot of applicants, but they're not fitting the right needs.
Mm-hmm.
From a headhunter perspective, you are looking for a specific person and personality that fits a company's values. Not necessarily always the perfect person for that position because they may not fit all the check boxes.
Right.
But what they're bringing to the table is much more valuable than just checking off a box.
Yeah. And if they're moldable, then it should be a good match.
Yes, trainability, or if they have experience with what they're looking for, but in a different industry, a lot of the times there's crossover that people are like, oh, you've worked in customer service doing X, Y, and Z, but we're A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And I have to help the company understand that X, Y, and Z is actually transferring to A, B, and C very well if you give someone that opportunity, which is not out there a lot of the times, especially nowadays.
Yeah, and that's a great point because I have had a client in the past where one of their best service coordinators came from a completely different industry. Mm-hmm. They were a service coordinator essentially at their previous job, but it was a completely different industry. So different beast altogether. With the types of people they work with, the problems they dealt with, and all that stuff. But at the same time, there were still a lot of the same, principles, if you will, that she was already very well versed in.
Right.
So,
personally, my executive assistant, her only background before coming on board with me was restaurant experience, customer service with restaurant experience, and I met with her, got to know her, and I followed my gut. Mm-hmm. And instantly I was like, you know what? I think she's exactly who I'm looking for. And ended up offering her the job on the spot. She instantly accepted. And now she's extremely valuable to my company. I don't know what I would do without her.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I heard that story briefly from her yesterday when I was meeting with you guys. And yeah, she said that she owes you a debt of gratitude or something like that. She'll never forget what you've done for her because of taking that chance on her, because so many people look at it as, well, restaurant experience, that's not going to apply to my business. Mm-hmm. It's like a leap, right? There's nothing really translates to that in some people's minds. Right. How do you overcome that when you're dealing with those high level executives that may, shrug that off?
Well, you have to talk in their language. You have to express to them, hey, these qualifications don't fit, or not qualifications, but these certain specifications aren't exactly what you're looking for. I almost have to convince them that the position they're looking for is broader than what they actually think. So it takes a lot of convincing. It takes a lot of pushing sometimes, where I have to almost navigate the waters and test it out to see, what their response is going to be. I've had companies that are like, no, we want the boxes checked. We want this person. And I find that person. But then I have the companies that are always really interesting. And, typically they're the smaller companies or medium size. I took a project manager for actually the same architect firm that I'm currently working with now. I've been with them for 2 years. And they were like, we need a project manager to do architecture and construction and this and this and this. And I found a project manager in the healthcare industry.
Okay, yeah.
Loved her, presented her. They loved her personality, and I was like, look, let's look past this and look at just her project management experience. They hired her. She's still with the company. She's on the leadership board now. She's one of their greatest assets.
That's awesome.
So it's very difficult to convince them to look outside the box.
Yeah.
But if you have an open mind and if you have a strong leadership, then a lot of the times they're open to that.
I think that's why you get paid the big bucks, right?
That's my hope anyways.
Yeah, it's changing people's mindsets.
Yes,
right? Ultimately.
You have to essentially figure out, like for me, I have to figure out psychologically where they're currently at, what they think, what leadership style they have, and turn it into more molding of what kind of psychology are you bringing to your team, and what are you willing to change or present to your candidates in order to attract them to your company. So it's got a lot of components to it, but yes, that's why I end up getting the big bucks, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you mentioned too, let's go back to one thing you said about when you were interviewing your executive assistant, right? Is that I want to know more about, you're saying that you got to know her. With your background and your experience, how do you get to know these applicants? Obviously, you have some in your company, so you're practicing what you preach, but how do you do that with your clients of getting to know the applicant?
I ask outlier questions.
Okay.
So I don't go, what are your qualifications? What's your work history? Because the first question you ask in almost any interview is, tell me about yourself.
Right.
Right then and there, everyone instinctually gives their work history, their qualifications, and what they've done. I don't want to know that. Okay. I have that on the resume right in front of me.
True. Yeah.
So my next question is, great, that's fantastic. Tell me, what do you like to do for fun? What is it you enjoy in your free time? What are you looking for long term? Are you looking for a career? Are you looking for something temporary? Are you wanting to branch into this industry and just get your feet wet? I ask questions about, you have to tread lightly because there's a lot of things that you can legally ask and, not legally ask.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I'm like, what's your home life like? What is it you, what are your morals? What are your values? And all during this time, I'm psychoanalyzing them and figuring out who they are as a person, not just who they are on a piece of paper. So I can tell you first and foremost, are you qualified to do the job? Your piece of paper in front of me is going to tell that. Are you qualified for this company? That's what you have to analyze.
Gotcha. And how many times what are the touch points? How many times do you interact with this applicant? On average?
Initially, at least 3 or 4 times before I meet with them via Zoom or in person. And then from that point on, I'm in constant communication with them through every aspect of the next steps. If they're a candidate I want to present, then I am every day in contact with them. I believe that it's important to not only work for the client side, but also represent your candidate. Because if you don't stand behind your candidate, what's the point of presenting them? So having that open communication with them and having that constant interaction not only gives them more hope and more positivity about the company, because that's who I'm ultimately representing.
They're having experience with that company.
Right. And if I'm presenting that company in a way that's interactive, communicative.
Yeah. Responsive.
That looks better than just a company that's going to churn out it was nice meeting you during the interview. I hope you have a great day.
Yeah.
Me, I'm like, hey, I hope you have a great weekend with your kids and good luck with this and that. And if you need anything in the meantime, just reach out. You can call me, text me, email. I just keep that line open. And 9 times out of 10, probably 10 out of 10, but I like to give myself some room for error.
Yeah.
Every candidate has been like, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic experience. And that's what I go for. Yeah.
And that brings me to 2 other questions, because you bring up a great point. And what do you call them? Applicant, job seeker? Candidate. Okay. So the candidate, and that's what I do too. So just stick with that. The candidate experience, I believe, is one of the biggest things that when when I browse social media to see what other people are saying about companies, right? Because I'm trying to get the other perspective. It's not great. No. And I've been on that side too in the past. And it's not great. Most companies fail miserably at the candidate experience. Just like as important as they call it like the, client journey mapping, for the experience that a client has with the company. The moment they see an ad or click a button or get a text, get a call, whatever, the whole experience from the time they click buy and after should be well nurtured, kind of like what you're talking about. And that's like completely, non-existent in the recruiting world. And so when it comes to companies that are, neglecting this candidate experience, like what is going on there? Why is that happening? And what do you do about that?
That's an excellent question. I could answer that question in a very long period of time because it's extensive. But in the shorthand, I think what it ultimately has to come down to is the leadership of a company. Because the leader is who makes the ultimate decision on things. So if the reputation is not great, that falls on leadership. Because the employees aren't doing great. And perfect example. Let's use a physician, right? Yeah. You go into a doctor's office, and from the time you greet the receptionist, you sit down in the waiting chair, you get called back, you interact with the MA or the nurse, then you see the physician, then you go check out, right?
Right.
If I come in and I have a great receptionist sit down, and then my MA is terrible, I'm no longer really interested in meeting with the physician. You've already put that bad taste in my mouth.
Yep.
So if your leadership doesn't take the time to find the right people, I love the expression, and I hate when people tell me this because I actually have to tell them, like, sorry, I can't help you. They just want warm bodies.
Yeah, I hate that. I hate that.
I can't supply. I mean, I can supply that for you, but I'm not going to because my company reputation's on the line then.
Yep.
And, each experience that you have ultimately comes down to the leadership of the company. The marketing aspect, what's been approved to be put out there, how are the employees being treated? How's management? Who did you choose to put in the management position? So it's very broad stroken, but ultimately it comes down to the leadership and roles and responsibilities of that person that determines the reputation of a company. And if I go into a company, which I research my companies before taking them on, I'm very particular about who I represent because it's my company. If I see that they have a negative reputation out there, a lot of the times I ask them questions about their leadership and what they're doing to improve that reputation. And if there's not a decent enough answer or they aren't really looking to make any changes to that, then I'm just not really super interested in continuing a relationship with them because you have to have that strong backing in order to represent a company.
Yeah. Yeah, that's getting to my second question leads into that is and you probably don't dive too deep in it, you're aware of it, but like the leadership, the responsibilities of leadership to have their fingers on the pulse of all that stuff. A lot of times they're either over the top micromanaging every single thing, and that means they're doing jobs that they're not qualified to do and making it worse, over engineering it, or they're completely absent, and then the people in charge are either apathetic or just neglected, and they're flailing, all over the place. Yeah. And so that's where those kind of dropping the ball can happen throughout the process. And obviously, like you're saying, depending on who's in management, you can have a great one, and then when you move people around, one move can completely disrupt the whole ecosystem, culture, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the whole dynamic can change. So getting to my second question, though, with this whole candidate experience, the responsiveness, what aside from you doing the work that you do and put into the passion and the time of being open to your candidates' communication, what makes responsiveness so streamlined for you? Like what do you go about to make sure that they're getting those responses like right away, like day after day? Why is that so important?
For the client side or the candidate side?
For the candidate.
I think it's really important because it's not done a lot anymore in this industry. I think follow-up's important. Even if you're not going to continue with a candidate, I think that email or notification of, we are moving forward with someone else is important. Then you have the candidates that you want to continually place or, keep them in the running. And you ultimately, you are a reflection of the leadership team. And so if I maintain an open communication with not only the candidate, but the client, I can then, hopefully my goal is to transfer that reputation to the company. And hopefully that answers your question on that. But yeah, so it's all about navigating the right way between that with open communication between both the candidate and the client, because a lot of the times that's where the disconnect is. So me being that mediator in the middle is what helps place the right people where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, it's the glue. It keeps it all together.
Tries to. We slip around sometimes, but
yeah,
eventually we'll dry and be nice and firm.
There you go. Now, with your kind of like the authority that you have helping your client find the right candidate, depending on how long that process goes, how many candidates you have, how good they are, how the client's working with you on your suggestions, your advice. What is like a reasonable amount of time to kind of keep some of those candidates in the pipeline before giving them a yay or nay? Like, what's that timeline look like?
That is my favorite question to answer. This is the most tedious part of what I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When I find a good candidate and I present them and the client likes them, but then they twiddle their thumbs and take a week to 2 weeks to make a decision, my candidate's gone.
Yep.
I just did an interview this morning, got off the interview, spoke with the owner, and very blatantly told him, you need to make a decision because this guy's only been on the market a week and he will not remain on the market through the week. So, they're like, oh, we're going to do the next stage of interview and then you're going to meet with this team. And it's like, no, you have to make a decision, especially when you have such a specific position that you're looking for.
Yeah.
When you come across the right person, you have to make that choice. That's your job as a leader. And yes, there's protocols and things you have to go through, but the timeline for that ultimately needs to be a few days. Truly. Otherwise, your candidate's gone. They think you just kind of sit back, relax, not eager, not interested. I stay in communication consistently with the candidate, but if the client's not responsive or making a decision to move forward, I've lost a lot of candidates that are unbelievably good for a job due to lack of responsiveness from a client, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Your hands are tied at that point.
Yes. So if there's any advice I can give out to clients or companies, it's be on top of it. Know what you want. And when you find that person, make a move because they are not going to be there for long.
Yeah. You said like 1 or 2 weeks and they're gone. Do you think a week is too long enough?
I think you need to respond to your candidate, whether you're interested or not, no later than 48 hours.
48 hours.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ideally 24.
Yeah.
Ideally 24. But if you go longer than 48, even from me, you're just not that interested. If you're not interested and eager to meet with me, then what makes me want to be a part of your team?
it starts throwing up red flags, right?
Right.
Something's wrong.
Right. So if you can't get your ducks in a row, then
Yeah.
maybe I may not want to join your team.
Yeah.
You really limit your accessibility to the candidate.
Yeah, I can see that because and from my perspective, if I know that my clients are the few that I've helped like set up ATS because they small recruiting jobs here and there, nothing crazy, mostly blue collar field work, and just trying to help refine their process. And if someone applies and no one's making a move 24 48 hours, well, first off, that person applied to what, 3, 4, 5 other companies. I mean, there's dozens of ads at the same time that aggregate on Google.
Yeah.
You search for a job title, you're going to find 10, 15, 20 companies you can apply for. Mm-hmm. You might not like half of them, but you applied.
Yeah.
And then if, my client's the one that's not responding fast enough, they can forget about that person responding back within even 48 hours, like you said.
I've had candidates go, I apologize, but which company is this for?
Yeah. And that's the truth.
Like, I can't be mad at that.
Yeah.
It's been a week since you've heard from me regarding the clients,
right.
So.
Because it reflects on the management or, their lack of time management, their lack of organization or lack of leadership, where the people that should be responsible for that are busy with other things. Yet this was a priority to get this posted as soon as possible. And then we've neglected following up with the people that actually have applied.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Yeah.
So outside of all that, what are some of the, from your perspective, some of the psychological approaches when it comes to a candidate's perception of a company? What are some of the biggest, I guess, red flags that you see that maybe a candidate's either giving you feedback on, or you're just sensing, or you're learning yourself? I know that you're doing a good job qualifying the client before you get on board, but are candidates giving you feedback about red flags or things they don't feel comfortable with throughout the process?
Yeah, for the most part, I think, I'll be very honest. I try really hard to almost counteract reputation for a client through my contact with a candidate. So a lot of the times, most of the candidates that I represent or clients that I represent have a positive experience because of the open communication. But a lot of the times it is the timing of things. I would say that has to be the biggest part of it. And from a psychological perspective, that makes the candidate feel small. And it makes them feel as if maybe I'm not as valuable as I thought, or, maybe they don't like me. And you can have an outstanding person, but as soon as you take your time and think about it and really, gotta talk to such and such and such and such, and then it goes 3 days, 4 days. Your candidates, you're psychologically breaking them down in a sense. And that's not fair to them. It's not fair to the client either, because then you're getting a broken person if you do choose to hire them. But most candidates' biggest concerns are, what does this company represent? Do they have anything that seems out of place? Does it not make sense? This is a silly one, but it's true. Does their website make sense? What is the grammatical look of their website? How are they presenting themselves? Because candidates want to work for a good company, right? Because they want their resume to look good at the end of the day.
That's true.
So I would say the biggest kind of red flags that clients can give off are not being descriptive enough in their companies when they're meeting with someone.
Yeah.
Being overly descriptive where you don't give the candidate enough time to actually talk. Come across that. And the timing of things. And I think lastly would be your quality of questions.
Okay. Yeah.
that would be another big one if I'm just kind of thinking off the fly here. There's nothing worse than only asking technical questions.
Yeah.
Because then you're not valuing a person for who they are.
Right.
You're not looking at the big picture. You're looking at, are you going to fill the slot I need?
Right. You're trying to find out how quickly can they disqualify themselves.
Correct.
Rather than what can you value in them.
The candidates luckily I haven't experienced where candidates had to say that, but I have had to talk to clients where I'm, tell them like, hey, this person's personality is this, which matches what you're looking for. Let's look beyond the box a little bit. And some are receptive and some aren't.
Yeah. So you bring up another great question in terms of the marketing part. Okay. I guess you use the term recruiting, right? Or
I headhunting, recruiting, acquisition. Depends on what I'm feeling for that day.
Gotcha. So from the client's perspective, in terms of what they're doing to promote the job opening and their company, what do you play in helping advise on that in terms of, say, a company? I know you do your research. A company wants you to help them with placing, a position, and their website's great, but things like their social media is pretty dormant. What would you say to that?
To the social media aspect, or more of the social media aspect, I think it's important to have that positive outlook, because let's say you're a family-based company, but you don't really show the family part of that company, then, what are you representing? What are you putting out there for people to know? I am probably not the best person to answer that one, because personally I'm not great with social media and I should be. But it's all about perception. It's all about what you want someone to think about your company. So if you want to put out that atmosphere, I think social media is a strong tool. Absolutely. And ultimately my goal with my new hire. But if you aren't putting it out there, what your values are, what you're offering to your employees, what kind of atmosphere or work environment you have, you're less appealing to a candidate for sure.
What it's not something that maybe you do yourself. The company's responsible for doing this, but in terms of sharing kind of like the inside look of what the company is all about, who's working there right now, any noteworthy events or celebrations or things that they want to share. How do these companies share that stuff? Is it through their website? Is it through social media? What else would it be? So candidates would see.
Both would be, their website and their social media. I've had the clients that just don't, and I'm like, why wouldn't you want to tell the world that you were voted best of whatever, But yeah, I would say the biggest outreach they could have would be their website or social media. The first thing any candidate does, looks at the website.
Yep.
So they're going to do a quick Google search on the company to figure out who they are. The bigger the position, the more research they do. The smaller the position, the less research they do. So it just depends on what you're looking for and what you want your company to say.
Gotcha. And so for like those, I guess, bigger positions, you would say doing deeper research, more research, does it behoove a company to have like a blog or some type of place that they're putting out written articles about, even if it's just the industry in general, it's not really technical, how they do everything, right? They got to keep it close to their chest. But if candidates were to dive deeper on researching a company, is a blog or something like that beneficial?
Not necessarily a blog. I would say that would fall more under the social media aspect, because one of my clients does they're family based, they're a great company, and they have an ongoing joke that the office next to them has a yoga studio. And so now every Wednesday night they have this ongoing hilarious thing where they do company yoga. And so
Nice.
the yoga studio will come over to the office, or they'll go over there, and like the company together,
Oh, that's
several
cool.
of the members or whoever wants to, does yoga together. That would be something that would really increase your perception of the company. It would increase the candidate's outlook, and it gives them something to look forward to, something that's like, oh, hey, maybe they do care a little bit more about me than just pushing out numbers at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so when you talk about increasing like the perception of the company, how can you do that in an authentic way to show what the inside of a company's culture is like, right? Because companies love to talk about culture, but how can companies do that in a way that's not canned or too corporate?
Being very genuine is what I would have to say. From my point of view, a lot of the times with candidates and clients, during the interview process is where you can pull that in. Give examples about what you do for your employees. Give examples about an employee. Bob was so funny the other day when he did such and such, and we now have an ongoing joke about it.
Yeah. More
Because
personality.
right,
Yeah.
more personality, more, I have interviews all day long where it's, okay, so are you good in this software system?
Right.
Are you excelling? What do you know how to do within this software
Yeah,
system?
it's robotic.
Which are fantastic questions, especially when you have a specific position. But then I have other clients that are like, what do you like to do? Who are you? One of the funniest thing is one of the interviews I did and sat in much way back when for a financial management position. The question they asked me that took me by surprise was, what's your favorite alcoholic drink? What?
Yeah. No,
But
definitely
it
throw
was
you off.
just, and I told them, I was like, what kind of question is that? And they were like, well, it tells a lot about your character. And I was like, well, that's true.
Yeah.
And to me, I was like, this is a fun company. This is, maybe they're not just a stuffy company looking for someone to quite literally churn out numbers, but maybe they're looking for the right person to join their team.
Yeah. And there's that fine line of balancing though too, I think, right? Because we've gone through the generations where companies were very stuffy and it's like, here's a job, this is what we need, take it or leave it type of thing, kind of the other way around. And now it's more, if you will, like the candidates know they have more options or at least know that they have higher standards and they're not going to just take anything. So it kind of puts clients and companies against the wall, if you will, sometimes. But so my question is, when you're, hold on, I forgot the question.
Let me respond to what you just said.
Yeah.
Most candidates, especially in today's market, there's a lot of layoffs, there's a lot of unemployment, and companies are starting to think that, oh, I'm great because I have a job to offer. Not necessarily the case anymore. Most candidates are now starting to be very particular about what companies they join because they are looking for that longevity somewhere. Now, don't get me wrong. There are candidates that just need a check. They need to support their family. Absolutely. But most positions that I work with, hey, I've been in a corporate setting for the last 10 years. I'm ready for more of a private sector job. You have to... In my process, I have to sell the company more than I have to sell the candidate.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's a lot to consider between both avenues and perspectives between both.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest challenge I see a lot of my clients in my industries facing, is that they're having to do more to really sell themselves rather than having people just walk in and apply for jobs now. And so, but going back to the topic, the comment about creative interview questions that help show a company's personality.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a fine line to balance. Where in the past, companies were stuffy and they didn't care about showing their personality. But now companies know that they should show more personality if they're paying attention and actually educating themselves on what candidates want out of those experiences. But then there's this side of, becoming too personal, showing too much personality, afraid of asking the wrong question. So like, how do you balance that when it comes to having those nice, like a breath of fresh air types of questions, but also if the company may be scared, we can't ask that type of question. How do you overcome that?
Well, first, always consult with HR to make sure you're legally allowed to ask the question. My best suggestion, it sounds funny, but almost have pre-planned questions. Get 3 to 4 HR approved questions that are more about who you are as a person or how you want to represent your company. And then of course you want your standardized questions, but you don't want to come across as, hey, I'm your buddy and we want to hire you. But you also don't want to come across as that corporate, stuffy, we are just a company that just wants to hire and give you a paycheck, Yeah. So finding the right questions, and you should ask the same questions to every candidate, because you are in a better position to analyze candidates against each other to figure out which one's the better fit. So having pre-planned questions, but delivering them in a genuine way.
Yeah, isn't that like the scientific theory or something like that, to use the same variables, and that way you can test against that. The inconsistent variable is the candidate.
Yes.
But the consistent variable is the questions.
Yes, and I will be completely honest, I'm the worst person for that. I get on talks, and I think that's what ultimately, and I hope, sets me apart as a recruiter. But I just get to know somebody. I just talk to them. Obviously, I ask the same general questions about specifications, qualifications, educational background. But as far as, something else, like, my questions vary depending on what their answers are. I like open-ended questions. I like to have very thought-provoking questions because it tells you a lot about somebody. So my questions are never the same.
Yeah, it's more of a holistic view, right, of putting them together rather than seeing if they just fit the mold.
I mean, if you are not an interviewer where you are just fluent in that language, then absolutely have a set amount of questions that you want to ask, or like a set of 5 that you can pick from, and then make sure you're asking the same 2. But yeah, I'm awful with that one, I'll be honest. I get on tangents, and I've had interviews where, they have a daughter in the area that does dance, and I'm like, oh, my daughter's wanted to do dance. Where do they go?
Yeah.
So I get very personal, but also stay very professional at the same time.
Yeah. Cool. Let me double check. Okay. Time. Just want to make sure we're respecting your time. So what was the other question I had for that? Kind of like wrapping up with that. Oh, so a lot of the companies I deal with, they are at a size that they don't have HR. They don't have an HR department. Most of the time we're helping to establish the hiring managers for each department rather than everything going to one person's email inbox.
Yeah.
And so, because they're not at a level where they're hiring big positions or hiring all the time, but they're struggling to fill some holes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you suggest in terms of resources for folks like those that don't have an in-house HR person, aren't ready necessarily to outsource that either? How can they educate themselves enough to have HR appropriate questions, have a more effective interview process? What resources would you suggest?
First and foremost, the federal laws and stuff like that on what you can and cannot ask, all over the internet. Go look it up on .gov, anything. Make sure it's a quality source that you're looking at. And to be honest, if you have a specific question in mind, most of the time you can just Google it. and it'll tell you whether or not you're supposed to ask that question. So, utilizing what resources you can that are within your means is important. A lot of the times you can actually talk to a recruiter or someone that is in that interviewing world, and they're going to talk to you for free. They're going to give you advice. They're going to tell you, and of course they're probably going to sell you on their services. But not a lot of people, especially small businesses, can afford a recruiter. So they have to take on that task themselves. And I respect that. I do it for my own company. And, really utilizing what resources, network with people. I think that's a big one. Getting out there, getting to know people. And I would say asking the right questions are really important. But as far as the legal or HR side of things, just look it up. It's really not. It's very conveniently placed. Few that come to mind. Can't ask about kids. Can't ask about age. Can't ask about marriage status or race or background. Those are big no's. Disabilities, you can't ask about that. But any general question that's not too invasive is pretty safe.
How would you frame talking about questions? So like when it comes to assessments, for example, if your candidates want your clients, if your clients want your candidates to go through assessments, how do you frame that to a candidate that they're going to be taking an assessment so they don't feel that it's necessarily discriminating or something like that, where it's just helping the client kind of put people in the corners they want? How does that help the candidate? How do you reassure the candidate that's going to help the candidate too throughout the process?
Awesome question. That is a big deal. I have companies that do prefer assessments prior to hiring, part of their secondary interview stage, so to speak. First and foremost, my question for the client: why do you want an assessment?
Yeah.
Why do you want an assessment done? Because some people say they are useless. Some people say they're absolutely beneficial.
Right.
I think they're beneficial, depending on the position you're hiring for, of course. But the way I present it to a candidate is, one of my clients is, they have a very cohesive team that has a unique dynamic that they are trying to maintain and want to make sure that anybody they bring on is going to be a great addition to that dynamic.
Yeah.
Rather than, maybe they won't get along with certain people, and having that advanced information so that they can navigate who you should work directly with. Or making sure you're going to thrive in that work environment.
Yeah.
Is it a remote environment? Is it more isolated? Is it a more public environment? Do you have to publicly speak? Are you going to be strong in that?
Right.
So I think presenting it in the way of, this is what they want because they want to know you better, not necessarily churn out if you're a fit. So, cohesion, dynamic, those are good words to use. Just making sure that you're presenting it in a way that they feel valued with it, not necessarily it's a checked off interview portion. So
Right. So not just bluntly saying that this is a pass or fail, or
right,
that even kind of staying away from the term to see if you're a good fit.
Right.
Yeah.
So exactly how I word it. The next stage of interviews includes a personality assessment as well as a small writing assessment. All we're looking for here is if you're going to be cohesive in the current team dynamic, and to make sure that this is going to be a good opportunity for you and the right placement for us. The writing assessment is to just see how your communication skills are, make sure that you are who you say you are, and that your personality and qualifications are going to line up with what we're looking for.
Awesome. Perfect. I'll make sure people use that where they need to.
Yes.
Which is a huge help.
You can change the words a little bit, but go verbatim if you don't know what to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a great question, and I personally love the personality assessments, especially for leadership positions and for marketing positions, I think would be the two strongest ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, it's having good intentions, but also being upfront about those intentions and not trying to just skirt past them or make them something they're not.
Or surprise them. Don't ever surprise them with an assessment. Give them a heads up, because otherwise they're like, two things. One, is this a spam? Should I not click on this link? And then things get lost and time passes. Or two, they get a little wigged out. Like, wait, I don't understand. Why am I doing this?
Right.
Why do you want this? So you got to be upfront and just be honest with them.
Yeah. So it's kind of breaking down their defensiveness, because right now they still don't really know you type of thing, right? And they're giving you all this personal information. Essentially, it's they already have your contact information, which isn't hard, but it's another level of, lack of a better word, vulnerability that you're sharing with a company.
Right. I mean, you're giving them a psychological analysis of who they are deep down.
Yeah.
That's terrifying for
a lot
some
of people want to ignore that, probably.
That is terrifying. I've had some
degree.
candidates that are like, not super comfortable with that. And I'm like, okay, well then, we'll just, see how it goes. And if you're the right, candidate that we choose to move forward with. And then unfortunately, we don't move forward with them because that's what the client wants. If you're not comfortable with that, then that just doesn't meet their expectation. So.
Right. Yeah. And we want it to be a long-term, fruitful fit. So, okay, cool. Well, I mean, that's all the questions I have really right now. And it's time, so I want to respect your time. Is there like one final thing that you want to share? I can like rephrase it into a question, but like, is there one more talking point that you had?
Not necessarily. I think, what, from your perspective and what you're looking for, companies need to know their own value and what they're offering to an employee and nurturing that in order to find the right candidates. You're going to hopefully get a dozen resumes. Not always, but hopefully get a dozen resumes. And you need to remember as a company what you're representing and what you're putting off for that candidate to see and get to know. Because not only are you selling the company, but you're selling the leadership style too. And if you don't back yourself up with the evidence or walk the walk, then that does come across pretty instantly. So making sure companies understand the importance of what they represent, who they are, who's representing them in an interview. That's always a fun one. And making sure that they are looking beyond the resume for someone. So just thinking out of the box.
Cool. I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kaytee. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll do this again soon. I've got a lot more ideas and things that we can break down and talk about from your perspective, and maybe add in a little bit of from my perspective so we can kind of glue it all together for people. But final thing to wrap up with. I know you mentioned that you work with primarily more experienced, higher level positions, right?
Yeah.
Specialized positions.
Yeah.
Is there, when it comes to the companies, I know I asked about their tenure, but is there like a certain size of company that you specialize in?
No, not necessarily. I have worked with startup companies at which I'm more of a recruiter and consultant to kind of help them get off the ground running. Real estate companies or financial backing companies, those kind of things. So I've worked with the small companies, but I personally like working with like a medium-sized company, anywhere between 10 to 30 employees, maybe in that range. Mainly because you get more genuine people that care about their company deeply. And when you find that they care deeply about what they are, who they are, and what services or things that they're providing, then you have a better outlook and representation. And like I said before, my reputation's on the line for what I represent, and I need to know that my clients got my back.
Right. Okay. And it's funny you mentioned the employee size in terms of like 10 to 30. But a lot of these companies that you work with, they have in-house HR representative or
Either in-house or outsourced. I've connected a few of them with some outsource HR companies that have just thrived with them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of companies, especially in my industries I work with, that get hung up on that, that are not ready to pull the trigger on that. And a lot of them are well beyond the 30 mark.
Yeah.
And so they're dealing with that headache. What would you advise to them? Like, what is that realistically?
If you don't want someone in-house, get you an outsourced company. I am a small company. I have a total of 9 employees right now. I outsource my HR because, one, HR is a headache.
Yeah.
Payroll sucks. Anybody who tells you differently is insane.
Yeah.
So outsource that stuff, especially for someone in a smaller company. A lot less money than you would expect. It's not as expensive as most people think.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get away with anything between maybe a couple $100 a month.
Yeah, that's a steal.
That's a steal. That's even better than hiring someone that may or may not know the job.
Yeah.
Instead, you have an entire company backing you.
Right. That's our experience and does things right. So it takes the stress and the time off your back.
Yeah. And I have a great HR company that I outsource to, and I recommend to other people as well that are just phenomenal.
Cool.
And reasonable.
Yeah. There you go. Okay. Perfect. Well, that's all I've got right now. And so, yeah, if you don't have anything else, we're all good to go.
I'm good.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.